Let's talk about it. Jake Lloyd Bacon here to tell you about my podcast, Elaborate, in which talking about it is exactly what we do. Listen, it's not super high concept. It's a talk show. I sit down with artists, actors, comics, and more, and I just try to connect. I try to explore the human condition, figure out why we are who we are, and how the hell we got here. It's a conversation. It's an interview. It's not exactly therapy, but it is often very therapeutic. So check it out. You might get something out of it. It's called Elaborate, and you can find it at elaboratepod.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Steven Sable.
Hello, Quillers, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Don't Quill the Messenger, telling you the truth about Shakespeare authorship. I welcome back to this episode one of my favorite guests, and apparently a favorite guest of some of you who were so gracious and kind as to write in and ask that we bring her back. She is, of course, my favorite leading lady, and one of the finest actresses I have ever known. Also a really great wife and fantastic mother. She is my wife, Annie Freeman Sable. Welcome back to the program, my love.
I am so happy to be back.
You know, it's true. People did write in and they did say that they enjoyed the last episode that we did together.
Aww.
So you and I got together and we talked about, okay, what would be another great topic for the two of us to discuss in a future podcast. And I threw at you the idea of, well, what about our bucket list roles, the roles that actors live their life thinking someday I really want to play this part?
Because you and I never tire of geeking out at 2 a.m. in the morning talking about our Shakespeare bucket list. It's true.
Well, okay, that is true. And then at different various times, we have also theorized, okay, which actor would we cast in this part? And which actor,
yes.
And creating like our ideal cast to play with.
Right.
And the truth is there are certain roles that, even though they are on my bucket list of roles that I long to play, if the circumstances of the production were not like to the measure that I would hope them to be to help fulfill that, check that box appropriately, I don't think I would accept the part. You know, there are certain circumstances that, you know, I don't want to play King Lear in substandard production of King Lear. I want to play King Lear in a great production of King Lear, which I guess I just gave away one of my bucket list roles, but we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about my bucket list later. We're going to get to yours in just a second. But yeah, so there is like also that layer of it too, where you talk about, oh, I want to play it and I want to play it like this.
Absolutely. I, still have on my list, not one of the ones I'm going to talk about today, but on my list is Helena from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Even though I have played the role, I was only 12 years old when I played the role, so I don't really count it.
Well, okay. So I think that's a really good point, because I think then actors have to say, okay, are they distinguishing in their bucket list? Are they distinguishing between their like adolescence and their adult life? Are they, because some child actors have played roles prior to 18 that are very significant in very significant productions. So I don't know that has like, that breaks off the
No, I wouldn't say so either. But again, it ties back into what you said, kind of a substandard production. So I would say, I haven't really checked that one off the bucket list and would like to have another stab at it. Okay. But there are some other,
for sure.
that's the reason why I got casted in the first place. She's the tallest 12-year-old in the school.
If you never met Annie, she's 5'10", so she would be a great Helena.
But there are other roles that I'd rather play, I think, before having another stab at Helena.
One of the keys to that show, Midsummer, is having 3 separate casts who are all spectacular and who all work well together, because you have the four lovers, and there needs to be that specific chemistry. And then you have the mechanicals, and there needs to be that specific chemistry. And then you have all your fairy folk, and then your supporting noble characters. And all of that, even when you're rehearsing the production of that, when you're in rehearsals for that production, you can even break them up, and often have to break them up into 3 parts until you can combine them all together.
Absolutely. And it makes it one of the most fun shows, I think, for us to pretend cast, because there are roles for everybody pretty much in it, right?
Well, and if any aspect of those 3, if any one of them sort of isn't to the same quality or level as the other 2, it's glaringly
it totally brings
obvious.
the show down.
Yeah,
you're
it
like,
does.
well,
And you're
man,
like,
that show of Midsummer
I really
was
wanted to
pretty
play
good.
Titania, but I wanted a bottom who could play off of my Titania, or whatever the case might be.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to talk about, so there's one, but you said that's not actually on your list, but we just talked about it. But we didn't talk about the reasons we're going to talk about some of these roles, because we're not only going to talk about roles that we long to play, but also reasons why those roles intrigue us from an Oxfordian point of view. And I think that for me, once I discovered Oxford and tied him to the works, it opened up so many more doors for me as an artist, not only as a producer and director telling the stories, but also as an actor wanting to tell the individual stories of the characters that I believe are most closely connected to him and his life and his soul even.
Absolutely. And full disclosure here, I'm much more recently converted into the Oxfordian family. So my level of knowledge is, not nearly as much as yours, my love. But I will say that having taken the time now that you proposed this idea to me of coming up with a Shakespeare bucket list, I immediately started to think about the conversations that you and I have had about De Vere and his relationship with his daughters, his relationship with his wife, his relationship with the Queen, and how it really affects every single one of the women on this bucket list of mine.
Well, and I would argue that it is truthfully more importantly in his life, the women who were in his life and influenced his life, than any of the men who were in his life and influenced his life, except perhaps maybe his father, of course, who becomes that ghost that follows him throughout his life in a myriad of ways.
Be one of the reasons why his female characters are so fully fleshed out and so wonderfully well developed.
Well, they're based on some of the most dynamic women to have ever lived in history.
There you go.
I would say that's those, talk about the 9 muses. And let's see, if you count, okay, let's count through them. You said the Queen, his wife Anne, and
his mistress Anne,
his 3 daughters, that makes 6. His mother is 7. His sister is 8. And I would say you have to include then his second wife, Elizabeth Trentham, is 9. And like, those are the 9 women. Those are the 9 muses of the Shakespearean canon right there.
Go.
Those women.
You got it. Well, let's dive into it then. I'm excited.
All right. So tell me, and you don't have to put them in any specific order, as in like this one is like the one it's hard. It's really hard to rank Shakespearean plays. It's hard to rank Shakespearean characters unless you give qualifiers. And as soon as you give qualifiers, well, then this one's best for this and this one's best for that.
Right.
This one's best for comedy. See what I did there?
Sure.
But I think that, to call them your top 5 is fine enough. You don't have to be like, this one's number 1. But if there's some way you can like count down to them or change the dynamic of them for whatever reason, then do that.
I'm going to start with one that I truthfully believe I've probably missed my boat on it, meaning I won't ever get to play it unless all of a sudden within the next year, somebody comes along and is like, hey, we want you to play this role, because I do fear I'm getting slightly too old to play the role. However, it's not a role that I've ever gotten a chance to play, and it's one of the ones that I have always wanted to play since I first started getting really into the whole Shakespeare female character love affair of my life, and that is Portia from Merchant of Venice.
Well, I of course understand why any woman would want to play that role. And then when you connect that from an Oxfordian standpoint, it's like tremendous role.
Absolutely. It's a tremendous role. And it was very interesting to me because I was listening to one of the podcasts that was done. It was not one of the ones that you were interviewing, but it was three men, and I'm not remembering all of their names, unfortunately. I apologize, but they did a whole podcast based on Shakespeare and the law and talked a lot about.
I'm certain one of them was Tom Renier. There's no doubt.
Yes,
the other,
definitely.
I believe, may have been Brian Wildenthal.
I do believe you're
came
correct.
back
Yes,
and did Shakespeare 101 with us back in the early stages of the program. And we're going to get Brian to come back and do another one for us, especially based on his new book. Mm-hmm. But then I believe the third one was Mark Alexander.
That does ring a bell.
If I'm correct, in that triumvirate of lawyers.
Sure, absolutely. Now, Portia is an appealing role with that aspect in it too, because one, she's one of the most famous female pants roles, we like to call them, where the women get to dress up as a man. And that's always fun. And some of his best characters are those pants roles. Rosalind, which I've already had the pleasure of playing, so I'm not going to include it on my list. Fabulous role. Would love the chance to do it again, but don't need to do it again because I was in a fabulous production of it, so I can successfully check that one off my list.
I have to say that to this day, that is one of the productions I'm most proud of. That
As you should be. It was a fantastic production. Anyway, Rosalind, Viola from Twelfth Night. Viola is not one of my favorite characters. It's not one of my favorite plays. I'd much prefer to play Portia from Merchant of Venice. And one of the reasons why is because I feel that Portia gets this opportunity in that scene where she comes dressed as the lawyer and is, comes with all that legalese that is so intelligent for her to come across and say, we need to collect this pound of flesh, but without a single drop of blood spilt. And it's so intelligent, and it makes you go, okay, this is somebody who actually had to have experience and understanding of the law and embody that in this female character who's, of course, dressed up as a man, so gets to say whatever she wants without the fear of being reprimanded for her sex.
Well, one of the things that I love about Portia, particularly as one of those, as different from the other pants roles. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the other pants roles, Viola dresses as a man because she's alone on an island and she's afraid that she'll be compromised as a woman. And
right? Rosalind dresses up as a man because she's escaping into the forest and is afraid she's going to be compromised
as a woman.
But and Portia dresses up as a man to go save her man.
To save a man's life. Exactly. It's a completely different motivation. And that's one of the reasons why I've always liked the character. But how do you, because this is something that's been tough for me, is how do you do the transition of that character from the early acts where it's, choose a box, and then to her showing up and being the heroine of the day.
Well, that's what makes it all the more exciting. Well, and I just say, Rosalind is similar in that way too, isn't that she starts off the play very much the young female love interest, right? And then enters into more of this very fun, I get to be a man type of phase. But for Portia, she is the young love interest, but she doesn't start the play with that immediate love interest. She gets this period of time, which I think is also intriguing to play, where she is going through these suitors who are vying for her attention. And some of those scenes are extremely comic because, you have these men who are kind of buffoons in her mind, vying for her attention. And you get to see how intelligent she is right from the beginning. So I don't think it's actually that much of a stretch for you to go, oh, here she was, this young damsel in distress. And now all of a sudden she puts some pants on and she, can speak law language and go out and save the man. I think you get a clue into it from the beginning, again, with her, the way that she handles the three men who are, battling for her attention by getting to choose the right box, and that she's not just going to get sucked right into the man. She wants to, separate each of them and make sure that she is actually falling in love with the man that she really wants, not just going along with the man that, her father sets for her.
Do you think that in any way Portia is a wink to the queen?
Absolutely. Particularly, I would say in that, because for me, the first inclination that I had when you started talking to me about Edward de Vere and his relationship with the queen and her history of suitors and courtship is that this could have been very much a mockery of the queen and her dealings with men, and she's got all these guys from different nations, right, coming in and seeking her attention, or, even men from the court seeking her attention. And she's kind of toying with each of them,
Well, and in those days too, to request a portrait or to commission a portrait of someone was one of the highest forms of showing your admiration to them, right? Is that I want your likeness captured.
Right.
And so there's that whole aspect of the three chests and the portrait involved. And I've always just kind of chuckled at that and gone, if there was anyone who was like, oh, you want a portrait of me?
It had to be the queen, of course.
Look how many portraits of her we have.
Right, exactly. She obviously had no issue with posing for a portrait.
But then also to demonstrate that she does have that no matter who chooses which box, no one's going to lord over her. And that becomes very clear about Portia.
Absolutely, it does.
She demonstrates that she is capable of holding her own in a man's world.
Well, and then on top of that, you get to, because she does really fall in love with Bassanio, and she has this whole monologue, this speech that isn't done nearly as much as some of her other ones, but it is, because it is very much just I love you and I give myself to you. And you do get really the sense of, okay, I have been very picky and choosy and I've had all these men come to me, but none of them has been quite right. But this is the one, this is the man that I do love. But you never get the sense that, again, she's just going to bend over backwards to allow this man to lord over her. And especially that transition toward the end where she goes, okay, now I'm going to dress up and then do the whole deal with the rings, her and, is it Jessica's Shylock's daughter?
That's correct.
Sorry, I don't remember the name of the other one though. I'm totally blanking. But her and her serving maid do the let's mess with our men, right? With the rings. It's Nerissa or something. Yeah. Okay.
You're correct. Nerissa.
So there is still this sense of that. He's the man that I love, but he's not going to be the ruler over me. We are going to have you get the sense that they're going to have a partnership relationship, right? She's not going to allow him to just take over, which was very much the queen, right? I don't want a man that's going to usurp my throne. I want a partner. And I don't know that I'm ever going to find that, right? And she never found that. She did never find that.
In having this conversation, it makes me think about the other three women in Edward's life that we did not mention that actually need to be considered. So maybe it's 12 muses. Because no, it's true, because there are many who would argue Penelope Rich is one of those women. And others who would have to say, and I'd have to agree, Mary Sidney had to have played some sort of part in it all. But also we're forgetting William Cecil's wife, whose first name is suddenly jumping right out of my brain.
I have no idea.
But why I want to say it's Margaret or Marjorie. There are plenty of people listening right now going, "Shame on you, Sable, for not remembering her name." But for some reason, it's not coming to me. But she basically was like a stepmother in a lot of ways, and very well known for her very puritanical, strict household.
Sure.
And that has to play a role in your life growing up.
Absolutely.
As a young man, and definitely has to come out in ways throughout the writing as well. And not only known for being this strict Puritan, but also a highly educated woman.
Right.
Super smart, and a partaker of her husband's expansive library on a regular basis. And I think it's one of the things that saves Edward's marriage with Anne is that her mother raises her to be smart and educated as well. And it's one of the ways that later on in life, after all of the turmoil and all of the conflict and the estrangement, I think what brings them together is their minds.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
And I think that's very clear in the evolution of some of the plays, and in those plays that you can specifically see, I think, in my mind, where he's apologizing to her for his treatment of her. And I'm wondering if you have any roles in your list that kind of touch on that at all.
I don't think so specifically for that type of relationship. The next one that I was planning on talking about is another one that goes into a pants roll type of another one of those, but it is,
From one pants roll
I think
to
it's,
another. Why do all the women want to play the pants rolls?
Because they're awesome. But the other three on my list are not. But that is, and this one is a lot more indicative of the relationship that he had, I think, with his daughters.
Okay.
So the next one I was thinking of is I've always wanted to play Imogen in Cymbeline.
Wow. Now, see, that's for a lot of people, that would be a very obscure choice, I think.
It's a very obscure choice.
It's a play that is not produced very often. It's a play that has some difficulties in its plot line and in its connective tissue.
It's not one of my favorite plays at all. But
she is
she's a great character.
Well, and I agree. The reason she's a great character is because she is based on one of his daughters. Do you know which one? Do you have a theory as to which daughter it is?
The middle one, Bridget.
It's always the middle daughter who's the problem. It's the middle child syndrome, isn't it?
Oh my goodness. We have a 3-year-old who is quite the little imp.
She is definitely Imogen material.
She sure is.
Doubt. And also Juliet.
Right.
That rebellion of no, I will not marry.
Because
who you
Imogen,
tell me to
like
marry.
Juliet, seeks to marry the man that her father does not want her to marry. So much like, I believe it was Edward's second daughter, Bridget, who did not want to marry the man that Edward had set in mind for her.
It's almost so cliche because it's such a reversal that it's like karma. It's a story where you can see karma playing out specifically, because here's a man who says to the queen, which is immortalized in All's Well That Ends Well. He says to the queen, I am not going to marry that girl. She is beneath me. She's a commoner. And the queen says, well, I just made her father a baron. He is now Lord Burleigh, William Cecil Lord Burleigh. So now she's no longer a commoner.
That's a quick fix.
What other problems do you have?
Right.
But then, all these years later, his daughter comes to him and says, I don't want to marry that nobleman. I don't love him. I want to marry a commoner. It's like, it can't be written. You can't write that stuff.
No. Well, then on top of it, so interestingly enough, so Imogen in Cymbeline wants to marry Posthumus, who is a commoner in comparison to her, but he's a respected general. And they get married, but he has to go fight, as generals do, and he has to go off. And and then he gets wind of, well, there's this whole subplot, plot line where she gets tricked into, giving over her ring to Iachimo, who's the villainous character of it. And he takes the ring back and says, she's been unfaithful to you. So Posthumus believes that Imogen has been unfaithful to him, as per this plot that Iachimo has set into place. And she has not been unfaithful, but it's very much that whole situation of Edward de Vere and his wife saying, you've been unfaithful to me, right? Which he went through with his wife.
How many women in the canon are accused of being unfaithful, who are wrongfully accused of being unfaithful?
Plenty. That's going to be another one that I'll talk about in a moment.
Okay.
Hint, hint. But so Imogen embodies not only the situation with his second daughter, Bridget, of desiring to marry a man that her father does not want her to marry and who her father would believe is beneath her, but also the situation with his wife, where he believes that she has been unfaithful to him and casts her aside. And Imogen experiences the same fate, where her husband, who she has sacrificed, to go, no, I'm going to put aside what my father has set in place for me, what my stepmother has set in place for me, and I'm going to instead marry this man that I love. And now he accuses me of being unfaithful. So one of the reasons why I actually don't like Cymbeline that much as a play in and of itself is because I think it's too much. I think it embodies way too many elements that you can pick up in so many other plays that are done better in the other plays, like the instance of the unfaithful wife, which is obviously, I think, the most commonly or most popularly personified in Othello. But also you have, Imogen, who runs off and in the same way that Viola and Rosalind do, is afeard of her being compromised as a woman, so dressed up in man's clothing. But then she gets basically toyed into this there's this whole other plot line where she gets taken up by this father and his two sons, and they're very like pastoral characters. And it's very much like Perdita in Winter's Tale, where she gets cast aside by her father and she runs off and ends up in the wilderness and raised by pastoral characters
she's illegitimate.
Because, oh my goodness. So it's so many plot lines all tied in together, and none of them are really, I think, drawn out as well as in the other plays that I can draw the similarities to. However, Imogen in itself, she has wonderful speeches. She goes through a huge character arc. Again, it's one of those characters that I'm probably missed because I'm just getting too old to play.
Oh, my darling. But you're always young in my eyes.
Oh, thank you. But have always wanted to play it because, in spite of the fact that the play itself is, I think, too many plot lines, too many things going on, for her, it would be way too much fun as an actress to play that character because you get so much to play with. You get the dressing up as a man, you get the cast aside of the husband, you get all of it. You get to run the gamut when you play Imogen.
It won't surprise anybody, but Bridget de Vere, when she did thwart those intents of her family, including her grandfather, her very, very powerful grandfather, her marriage ended miserably.
Failed.
Oh, it was horrible. It turned out really, really bad.
Right.
Yeah. She ended up a widow. But yeah, under very, scandalous circumstances and whatnot, including I believe that her husband turned out to be homosexual and not really interested in her.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then his death, there were suspicious circumstances around his death that may prove it to have been a suicide. So she married and had terrible tragedy happen to her. You also often wonder sometimes if there wasn't some kind of de Vere family curse,
Right.
that befell upon this long-standing, ancient titled family, because a lot of horrible things happened to him and to members of his family.
Right.
Yeah, throughout that life.
Well,
and that
you know
in
what?
itself,
It makes
regardless of whether
material for
you
great
believe-
plays.
It does. And this is something I've always said too, is take all the plays out of the mix. It's a great story. Like
Yes, it
Hollywood
is.
needs to just tell the story
Right?
of Edward de Vere. But the problem is you can't tell the story of Edward de
You
Vere
can't
without there being these giant holes and
without
gaps.
there being the authorship question in there as
so
well.
it's a catch-22, right?
Right.
It's one of the most compelling lifetimes ever lived.
Mm-hmm.
And once people finally accept the joining together of these portions of this lifetime, it will be one of the greatest stories ever, to be told together the way it needs to be. Will be tremendous, and it will happen someday. It will.
So I want to say, just because I've having spoken of Imogen, which, even in the connections to de Vere's life. Now, it's interesting because when I first read Cymbeline and thought, oh my gosh, this is way too much of a conglomeration of way too many Shakespeare plays. And now knowing what I do about Edward de Vere and his life, I thought, oh my gosh, it's just such a conglomeration of so many things that happened to him in his life and influences that he had based on his relationship with his wife and a relationship with his daughter. So again, tying into so much familial relationships and particularly with his daughters, I wanted to ask you about the role I know that you wanted to play, which again, you hinted at earlier before, which was Itch's Lear, because I also see some connection in Cymbeline again. I was like, this feels like King Lear and his relationship with his daughter. Could you talk a little bit to me about why it is that you would want to play Lear, especially from the Oxfordian perspective?
Okay, I'm gonna hold Lear off until later in the program.
Really?
Just because since you not that we had established rules on this or anything, but
Okay.
Since you talked about roles that you were like, probably getting beyond my range.
I see. And you're you've got plenty of time to still play Lear.
Yeah, but wait. Thank you. No,
Thank goodness.
No, I don't know. My ears might be behind Lear today. No, actually, I believe I'm going to start memorizing Lear now so that when I am old enough to play Lear, the lines will be up there somewhere already.
Yep.
Because as you get older, it becomes more difficult to memorize these giant roles.
Okay, so
and I'm certain that he understood that in the writing of them, and that's why as the roles get older, they tend to become smaller, except for in these kinds of extreme cases like Lear.
Like Lear. Exactly. Yeah. So give me one of the roles that you feel.
Henry V.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm too old. I'm too old to play Henry.
Wow. I was going to put Juliet on there, but I'm way too old for Juliet.
I never had any interest in Romeo, really.
No, Juliet's the better character.
Actually, to tell you the truth, I do look forward someday to playing Lord Capulet.
Yes.
And
you'd make a fabulous Lord
roles
Capulet.
in Romeo and Juliet, that is the role that I think is one of the best roles in the play.
Mm-hmm.
And
there you go, another father-daughter relationship.
Yes, and it's such a compelling relationship, and the arc of that character and the grief that character has to endure, I think is one of the most emotionally true moments in the play.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, these kids have known each other how long? And they're fast in love and blah, blah, blah. And that's a part of the story too. And I think that's a part of the point of the story is that, that love has so many different definitions to it. Right. In fact, at the 2019 October conference in Hartford, Connecticut, a friend of mine, Dorothea, she said, the Greeks have 15 different definitions or 15 different words for love.
Right.
Right. And we have one.
Yeah.
And each of those different Greek words for love means a different kind of love, whether it's paternal love, and I think that, and she was saying, and not to get off on a tangent, but she was saying that that's part of a key to understanding the sonnets is trying to identify the type of love that is happening between the various personas that are involved. And I agree that that is an essential key to the solving part of that mystery. But the love that Lord Capulet has for his daughter, even though it is a 15th century fashioned love, because I see Romeo and Juliet as being set before the true Renaissance, right? It's a little pre-Renaissance in its style and in certain things, and that's how I like to present it too. But anyway, it is that sort of parental, you are my chattels.
It definitely that aspect. Yeah.
But there is a true, to that extent, the way he's been taught to be a loving, caring father, he is.
Yes.
Fully.
Yes.
Right. And he is trying to make sure she will be cared for forever.
He truly does want the best for her.
Yes.
Right.
And so then to lose his temper the way he does with her and threaten her the way he does, and then to ultimately lose her is a lesson in itself, right? About love and loss.
Well, and you can sense at the very end of the play his immense grief at what has happened to her. You might think that in plenty of other fathers of daughters is like, well, at least it wasn't my son, right? But you do feel the immense grief that he feels at her loss, I think.
I wonder to somewhat how much that might be how Romeo and Juliet and the personification of Capulet, we talk a lot about Polonius and Burleigh, right? And even, every scholar on every side of the authorship question.
Whether you're a Stratfordian or an Oxfordian or a Baconian or whatever.
It's one of the Stratfordian's most difficult things to deal with is that it's so glaringly obvious that it's this guy.
Right.
But I will often sometimes look at characters like Lord Capulet and also like Leonardo in Much Ado About Nothing, which is another role I look forward to playing. And I know these are roles of people going, really? I didn't think of that. I'd be thinking he wants to play, this, lead wants to play Antony in Antony and Cleopatra.
Sure.
Which, yes, of course I do. But there are also these other really rich roles that I think connect to Edward and the people in his life. And I think of those two fathers, for instance, Capulet and Leonardo, and what they go through with their daughters. And I think that there's not only a glimpse into the relationship that Edward had with his daughters, which leads then to Lear later.
Right. There you go.
But also I'm wondering if it's not a reflection in some ways of the way that William was with Anne.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, I can only speculate, but I would imagine so.
My guess is that William Cecil treated Anne Cecil very much the way that Lord Capulet treats Juliet. And the same with Leonardo and Hero. Right. At one point, Leonardo almost strikes her dead.
Right. Well, and same with Capulet, not strikes her dead, but
it's there in the text. The way the Caesarea are lined up, the action points in that speech, the way the other characters respond, he literally goes physically after her and has to be held back.
Yeah, restrained from harming her.
That's an extremely real moment in that play, right?
Yeah.
And I think those are the moments that when you know Edward, you go, what a real moment. And they make you choke up and they make you think about what he must have lived to put that onto paper that way, and you go, I
mean, knowing again about how tumultuous his relationships were with his wife, with his daughters, with now I'm learning, and this is the first I've really heard you talk too much about her, about his mother-in-law.
Mildred.
Mildred.
I knew it was
There
an
we
M.
go. And we got to it eventually.
I knew there was an M, and I was like, God, what
It just, again, it makes you appreciate those types of characterizations, the paternal figures, the daughter figures, even more than you ever could, speculating that it's a man from Stratford who wrote these plays, knowing, that all he cared about his daughters was very little, that he didn't even teach them to read, So it makes you appreciate those relationships even more and makes you go, okay, yes, a man who did actually experience that level of connection, but also that same level of grief when they would go against his wishes, that same level of anger, that same desire to strike them but have to be restrained.
I'm sure that Will Shakespeare of
wanted
Stratford
to strike plenty of his daughters.
Went through levels of great achievement, and because he raised himself up as a businessman.
Absolutely.
And he made a lot of money. And I'm sure he went through terrible moments of grief. He lost a son.
Absolutely.
And knows that the grief of losing a child, which, is I can only imagine, and God forbid we ever have to face that.
Right.
But I can only imagine, and I know some who have, what a tremendous amount of grief that is. So it's not to diminish that Will Shakespeare wasn't a real guy.
No.
It's just that his experience and the things that he
they
lived
don't match
through
up.
don't match. Right, exactly.
It doesn't match up. Yeah, it is the matches that can be made to Edward de Vere's life are so it painstakingly obvious now, I guess, having learned as much as I have, which is still minimal in comparison to what you know about it.
Okay, so I have guessed what your next role is, and I have my own interesting story to tell about that same play.
Wait, before we go on, Leonardo is on your bucket list,
yes,
though, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes,
All right. Okay. So what's my next one then? Yes.
No, I love Much Ado About Nothing is, even after I just made that comment earlier in this program about how hard it is to rank the plays.
Right.
Much Ado About Nothing is perhaps one of the most perfect plays ever written.
It is my favorite comedy. It's my favorite comedy.
So many wonderful dramatic moments.
It does. And that's what I think makes it my favorite comedy.
In the comedy that make it just such a wonderful, wonderful play.
It is.
You could argue that the villain is weak, but the villain does what the villain needs to do. And then it's not a part of the story.
Exactly.
And that's what's brilliant about the play.
It is. And you don't need a strong villain because you have that dynamic relationship between Beatrice and Benedict, and you care so much about what happens to them at the end of the play that you don't need a gigantic conflict between a villainous character and a hero character in order to make that happen.
People talk a lot about how The Lion King is based on Hamlet, but it also uses some Much Ado About Nothing structure in that Scar sparks the incident that leads to the entire story, and then we really don't see him again until the very conflict at the very end, right? And it's very much like Much Ado About Nothing, right?
Or it's like Don John exists to cause evil and then
John
disappears.
And I'm out of here until Act 5.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need to hear from me any longer.
And so, people complain about, what a terrible role that is. And he's such a stereotype villain and there's no depth or dimension to him, which is why Keanu Reeves was able to play it so well.
Hey, we love you, Keanu.
Of course we do.
He's an Oxfordian, right?
He is. He's awesome.
But anyway, what's my next role?
Desdemona.
Oh, yeah. Desdemona, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, talk about wife wrongfully accused.
Yes, definitely wife wrongfully accused. So here's the reason I would want to play Desdemona, because ironically enough, when I tell people that I want to play Desdemona, they seem so surprised by it. Like, oh, why? She's such a victim. He strangles her at the end. She's such a... and it's not a huge role. I think it's kind of like an Ophelia character, and Ophelia was on my bucket list before I got the privilege of playing her twice in two wonderful productions. But Ophelia and Desdemona, I think, have strength of their own right, but are definitely victims of circumstances. But Desdemona, definitely, without a doubt, is another character who goes against her father's wishes to marry the man that she loves. Now, I think one of the reasons why people see her a lot more as a victim is because that actual happening is not personified in the play. When we start at the beginning of the play, she and Othello are already married. So you don't see the conflict that she has with her father nearly as much as you would see the conflict that Imogen has with her father, or that Juliet has with her father, and about regarding the state of her marriage. It's already happened. So they're already in their relationship, and there's this sense of acceptance from her father. But what makes, I think, Desdemona, so you come into it already, she's got this strength, she's got this connection. And I do believe that her love for Othello is 100% pure. I mean, some people might argue otherwise. Some people might say that she really was having an affair, whatever. In my mind, no, she and Othello do really, really love each other. And
you and Ted Lang are going to have to go a couple rounds on that one.
Oh, we will. I look forward to it, Ted. You and we're going.
His prequel, which touches a lot on, and he and I did an episode that touched on that, and he also made a presentation at the October 2019 conference.
And I look forward to seeing it. I know it's on video now.
YouTube.
I know.
Yes,
I can't wait to watch
it on YouTube.
But you and he would have to go
round and round on that one, because he seems to have this belief that maybe Desdemona is not the all pure angel and pure good.
Well, I don't think she's an angel. I don't think she's all pure good, but I do believe that her love for Othello is pretty true. And I think that is she a victim of the circumstance? Absolutely she is. But I think there's a level of strength to her that is because she's not a huge role. I mean, obviously the other two characters that I've named off so far, Imogen and Portia, are much larger roles. Desdemona is not a very large role, but that becomes the challenge to the actress, right? So how can you convey this level? How can you make her? I think I've always viewed it now as this challenge I have from the people who are like, what? You want to play Desdemona? She's such a victim. How do you make her not the victim? How do you, up until the very end where her fate is sealed and he's, smothering her to death, how do you make her not that victim? How do you make her a strong woman within her own right who went against her father's wishes to marry the man that she loves and who I believe is truly the man that she does love? So I
don't disagree. I think one of the things about the play that has always bothered me is how he strangles her dead and you believe she's dead. And then all of a sudden she just pops back up and says a few more lines and then absolves him of the guilt and then says a few more lines and then dies. And it's like, how does that work? I'd love to have a doctor tell me
right? Yeah.
how that possibly works. But
I understand. Yes.
It's the same as so many characters in the canon who have to announce that they're dead. Oh, I am slain. And then
thanks,
they die.
Bottom. Pyramus.
But the fact that she does have in those last dying breaths this moment, and there are, I think even Harold Bloom wrote extensively about this, I believe, is how suddenly she demonstrates that she is capable of lying when she says it wasn't him. He didn't do it. Now,
sure. Okay. Interesting.
Right. I think that's taking it a little bit too deep because I think the point is to demonstrate that she loves him so much that she's willing to die for him.
Well, and I think she knows too that this is not, maybe even saying in her heart, it's not him. This is not the man I love and that I married that would do this to me. This is a man who has been poisoned.
Yes.
And maybe she even knows that it's Iago, I mean, imagine she would, but that, and I think that's one of the things that I love this play, and you talk about how, nobody wants to see it because it has to do with, wife killing, and that's a horrible subject that not a lot of people want to see. But I do really love that play. And I think one of the reasons why is because, one, I think Iago's the fabulous villain that, Don John is not, right? We talked about those just like stock villains that are just villains for villain's sake. And Iago is not that. And he's a fantastic character.
The play could be called, the play truly could be called Iago in the way that Macbeth is called Macbeth, because
right.
Iago is this sort of strange anti-hero slash villain in much the same way as Richard III too. So
sure.
The play really could be called Iago.
But then you've also talked about how Othello is one of the most well-written, I don't want to say well-written, but eloquent.
Yeah.
Yes.
His speech is very flowery.
He is. So it's not just Iago that is like
he
this.
Speaks as a poet.
The two of them are fantastic characters, right? So then it comes into, and I always say, like, I think Amelia is a fabulous character as well, and I would like the opportunity at some point to play Amelia. However, I would like to really bring to life Desdemona, more so for the reason that I just said, which is a challenge to make her not the victim, to showcase her from the get-go, her own strength, her own love for Othello, her own place in this role. But also, and this is going to sound really crazy, I'm a sucker for a character that gets a good death scene.
Okay. So
I like playing roles that get to die, which is really weird.
Okay, so I played Iago, and it is one of the best roles ever to play. It is Shakespeare's second largest male role.
Yeah.
After Hamlet.
Yeah.
It is a monstrosity of a role that gets into you.
Yeah.
In weird ways.
Yeah.
That are.
I imagine so.
Yeah, it does.
Because you have to take yourself there in order to play this character that's capable of doing that.
Just like actors who play Hamlet can tend to be a little melancholy through the rehearsal process of Hamlet and trying to like find what's happening with the character. I think with Iago, people who play Iago can tend to start to become a little more negative, a little more bitter. Like
sure.
It can bleed in a little bit. But so what I'm driving at is I would like to play it again. I played it so long ago, and I'm much older now. In fact, I'm more age appropriate for the role
you
now
could definitely play it
than
now.
I was when I played it back then. So the question I would have for you is, if I were mounting a production and playing Iago,
all we need is the Othello. Let's do it.
Well, that's not so hard to come by either. The question, Ted Legg's listening right now going, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
When is this happening? Tell me where rehearsals are going to be. But what I'm asking you is Desdemona or Amelia to my Iago? Oh, see, that's a tough call for you, isn't it?
Yes.
Because we would light it up together as Iago and Amelia.
We
that
really
would be intense.
No, we really would.
And then you still get a great
So here's
death
what I'm
scene,
going to come
and
back
I
to
get
you.
to kill you.
Here's what I'm going to come back with you.
Yes.
Yeah. I work out a deal with the other gal,
Oh.
and we switch nights.
Okay, I love that you said that, because that play has a very, very long history of that.
Yeah,
Othello. But with the men playing
right?
Othello and Iago.
Back when it was actually
And
culturally appropriate for people to put on blackface.
Well, one of the things I was going to say is, you mentioned that I say a lot of people don't want to see the play because they don't want to see someone like killing their wife.
Yeah.
And killing of wives and I think I truly do believe that that's hard for a lot of people to sit through, knowing that that's what they're going to go and sit through. But I think the racial element of the play is also uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Okay, sure.
And I think that if you look at that, I think that part of that is a good thing, in that there's a higher sensitivity to that topic. But I also look back at the history of the play and I go, okay, here's one thing that will never happen for me is I love that role. I believe that Othello speaks Edward.
Yes.
I believe the reason why he's such a beautiful poet is because he's exemplifying the poet who wrongfully accused his wife.
Right. Okay, sure. Yeah.
And unfortunately, I will never have the opportunity to ever play that role, such as white actors throughout history have been able to play that role.
Right. Like Laurence Olivier was one of the most famous Othellos, right?
And it would become very difficult for a production to ever have that historical aspect to it, that this play does have this long history of two men switching roles night after night after night.
Right.
I don't know how it would be very difficult to accomplish that now today.
Nope. But the two women playing Desdemona and Amelia definitely could. Oh, and that's the thing too, is those
so
characters,
doable.
and extremely doable too, because those characters aren't nearly as big as Othello and Iago either. Like, can you imagine the feat of learning both Othello and Iago and having to switch roles? Like that is an intense feat to learn both of those roles, to be able to play it and switch like that.
I'd have to look at the line counts and see,
but that
if
would be
combined
ridiculous.
It's more than Hamlet.
I'm sure
is,
combined it's more than Hamlet.
But easier
depending
than you
upon
think
cuts.
when they have so many scenes together.
That's true.
Right. And so you already know
You're
those
learning
lines
just the
anyway.
whole
you know
scene.
all those cue lines. You
of
know
course.
what that actor is saying back to
that's
you.
true.
Like, so that part of it probably makes it a little bit easier, I would think. But still, Herculean, of course.
But anyway, all right.
So
we just need to find the right Desdemona Amelia counterpart, and we're doing it.
Iago is such a amalgamation of,
good word.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Of characters from De Vere's life. Probably most chiefly is Roland York, who certainly played a huge part in turning Edward against Anne and making him believe that she had been unfaithful. But also one of his cousins, one of the Howards, who turned on him because of the whole Catholic espionage that occurred between them and the crown, and Edward being pulled in as a witness and all of that, and then them attacking him and calling him all kinds of things, including a pedophile and all kinds of horrible things. That was sort of the beginning of the real end, I think, in a lot of ways. That whole mess continued to play a part throughout later on, in snowballing ways that were like residual. Yeah. So those characters, those people, I think all come together as Iago. Yeah. Yeah. And I always said that Tolkien used Iago as the model for Wormtongue. Sure. In the J.R.R. Tolkien novels.
Definitely. Right? Iago he's that snaky, wormy, but it's so brilliant in how it's done. It is because he does
everything that a hero does.
He does.
Including like things that audiences love about
you can't help but love him.
He sings.
Right. He's charming.
Play. He tells jokes.
Right.
He drinks and carouses.
Right.
He takes off his shirt at one point, right, to help bind the wound, right? Like he's, he does all of these things that heroes usually do, right? I think Matthew McConaughey was like, "Oh, Iago takes off his shirt. I want to play that part." And then somebody said, "Yeah, it's Shakespeare, and it's this many lines." And he went, "Okay, never mind. I'll go take off my shirt in some beach movie instead." Sorry, Matthew, if you're listening. But I'd love to see you do some Shakespeare.
One of my best, I think still to this day, best Shakespearean movie I've ever seen. Well, it's a toss-up, quite honestly, actually. But they're both Branagh films. And it's Kenneth Branagh and Lawrence Fishburne doing Othello is one of my favorites, hands down. Second, maybe only to Much Ado with, Emma and Kenneth.
Yes, so. I agree. And one of the things, back to Keanu, for instance, caught a lot of grief for that movie, but people don't remember how young he was.
No,
when he was playing that
movie was made in
that movie.
That movie's like almost 30 years old.
And
about 30 years old.
The amount of work, like the body of work that he has amassed since that time is commensurate to some of those other actors. And in many cases, in some of those actors, nobody knows what they're doing right now. Right. Meanwhile, Keanu is still making blockbuster films. Right. So, who has the last laugh there, right? But I agree. That is one of the finest Shakespeare stories ever to put to film is that version of Much Ado.
Yes.
It's a fabulous version. And I also agree that the Othello, I think Fishburne is a little too stern. And I think that the risk of Othello and the goal of the actor playing Othello is we need to see the man that Desdemona created.
Yeah. Right.
As much as possible until we see the man Iago has created. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I think that there aren't enough in the text. There's just not quite enough. There aren't enough moments for that. And so the actor playing Othello has to really embrace those moments. Yeah. Right. Where when he's with her, he is just beaming with joy,
right,
and love, and everything else is fabulous. And they're like, we need to go fight a war. Okay, let's go fight a war, right? Because I'm so happy.
Oh, I'm itching. When do we start rehearsals?
Let me work on it. Okay, so next for me.
Wait. Okay, so let's see. You briefly mentioned Henry V, Lord Capulet, Leonardo.
Yes.
And that's next for you. Let's see. There's another one before we get to Lear. Brutus. No, you've played Brutus.
No, I have not played Brutus.
Oh, that's right.
But it's not Brutus.
It's Cassius.
It's Cassius.
Yes, I knew it was Julius Caesar.
It's Cassius. Yeah. Brutus is the unsung hero in so many ways, including in any production of that play. Right. Cassius has all the better lines, all the better, not
You're
all
right.
the better lines. But Cassius
is the,
and he's not an Iago because he's not a villain.
No, he's not.
Right? He's just a different ideology that changes the course of history.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It's a more interesting role to play. I think, the play, that's talk about a play that needed a different title. That play needs to be The Tragedy of Marcus Brutus. Right. Because that's what it truly is.
Right.
I think I would rather play Cassius. I've played Caesar, which is a fun role to play because, you're in the first few, you're in like 3 scenes, you die, you come back as a ghost later. Peace, I'm out.
That's right. You played Caesar, not Brutus. Okay.
Caesar's a lot of fun because it's I'm playing the title role,
right?
And I have very little to do except for die this magnificent, the most famous, arguably the most famous death of all history. Right. And so that makes it tremendously fun. And when I did it, I had blood packs everywhere and they were all coming at me with their daggers and I came stumbling out this bloody mess into Brutus's arms. Yeah, it was fabulous. So I loved that. That is a great death moment. So
for a play like Julius Caesar, which is obviously a dramatization of history, what do you believe would be, is that like one of Edward de Vere's propaganda pieces in drawing parallels from Roman history to the English monarchy?
Okay, here's a confession I'm going to make right now to all of our 7 listeners. One of the most important scenes in that play is the tearing of the poet Cinna.
That's so interesting that you say that.
It is one of the most important scenes in the play. It is there for very specific reasons. And you want to talk about propaganda, or you want to talk about sending a message, telling everyone who's watching. And as a court drama, it's telling the people who are watching, beware the crowd. Keep the people happy. London must stay happy just as Rome must stay happy. And that's a huge message to be delivering to the court.
Sure.
Right? If you think about it. And that's why that scene is so crucially important.
That's so interesting that you say that, because when I was studying in London, we did master classes pretty much once every week with some very famous British actors. I mean, one of the ones that I remember the most on the top of my head was with Alan Rickman. Rest in peace. Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
God bless him.
God bless him,
God rest
right?
his
I
soul.
mean, it was fabulous to be able to have a masterclass with Alan Rickman. But one of the ones that we did was with a gentleman who, very, very famous theatrical actor, but also and a handful of films. All of the actors that we did masterclasses with were in at least one of the Harry Potter films. So I know he was in one of those, but he took us as an entire group, our whole group of actors, and we basically reenacted. He staged that scene for us because he felt, just as you said, that it was one of the most important scenes in that play, and he loved teaching it to actors because of the power of the ensemble in that scene, right? So we all had to, like, it was a lesson to teach us as actors to stage an ensemble piece, right? So it's a crowd piece, and how to make that dramatic and how to make that so
There is an incident that, well, there's probably more than one, but there's at least one famous incident in English history that involves a similar situation where a guy gets killed by the crowd during an uprising, just because he happens to have
the same freaking name.
Yeah. And so, and it's not that far before Elizabethan history. So it would have been something that people were pretty familiar with.
Right.
That had happened.
That's so interesting.
It's one of those moments of, hey, remember what happened to that guy?
Right.
And we need to make sure we're keeping the plebeians at bay.
Right.
And the assassination of an anointed queen is going to result in a bloody civil war where you could die just because you have the wrong name.
Right.
So long live the queen is a huge message of that play.
Yeah.
And so sophisticated and so political in ways that the bumpkin from Stratford could never
could have realized.
No.
So speaking of dramatizations of history in Shakespeare plays, can you guess my next role?
Well, I know that you and I are going to be presenting in Ashland at the 2020 conference during the days leading up to the conference, some stuff involving the Henry VI cycle and Queen Margaret. So I don't know if you're going Queen Margaret.
I was not going for Queen Margaret for this answer
because we're going to be working on that together.
It actually touches closer to Julius Caesar, though, than that. Much closer to Julius Caesar.
You want to play Cleopatra?
Heck yeah, I want to play Cleopatra.
Okay, well, Cleopatra is the largest dramatic female role in the canon. Are you sure you can handle it?
Well, I did Rosalind, and she's the largest comedic character.
She's the largest female character, period. She even has more lines than Cleopatra.
She is, I think, just barely, but yes.
As long as you include the epilogue.
As long as you include the epilogue.
Wait a minute. Before we move on to Cleopatra, though,
yes.
And then we're going to be running out of time for this episode.
Yeah,
so we'll finish with Antony and Cleopatra.
Okay.
But before we get there, there was the confession I was going to make is I always cut the scene where they shred the poet Cinna from every production I have produced of Julius Caesar.
Why?
Because only astute people are going to get that layer, and it's a very difficult scene to stage, especially if you don't have a really good quality ensemble. And it becomes like the pirates in Hamlet. It's something you definitely, as an Oxfordian, want to see because you want to laugh at and go, because that was in his life. Yeah. But as a producer director, you're like, I don't want to deal with damn pirates stealing my show away from me. I don't want to deal with plebeians and a poet who thinks that they're suddenly the most important.
Someday you need to write a book called Plebeians and Pirates, the woes of a Shakespearean director or something like that.
You know what? That's actually, dear, that's a really, really good idea. Someday in all my free time.
Right? All your free time?
Yes, I will write Plebeians and Pirates.
Plebeians and Pirates.
A guide to cutting Shakespeare.
A guide to cutting Shakespeare. I love it.
It's sacrilege.
I love it.
It's sacrilege.
No, a director's
editing Shakespeare
guide
for the stage.
Yes, that's it. That's the one. Director's guide to editing Shakespeare. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Oh
All right.
my goodness.
Okay.
So before we run out of time, because but we could talk forever, and we often,
of course we could,
and we often do. But Antony and Cleopatra. I didn't know that Cleopatra was on your list.
Yeah, Cleopatra's on my list, and one of the reasons why is it's another death scene, though I don't like it as much as Desdemona's death scene. But she is. Again, it's kind of like the Imogen story. It's not one of my favorite plays. There's a little too much going on. And that's one of the reasons why.
Holy God.
It's like, hey, let's take years and years of history and throw it all into
In
one.
fact, the whole pantheon of Egyptian gods and goddesses. I mean, my word, it's from a production standpoint, there are 12 different locations in the play.
Yeah. Right.
And
so it's ridiculous.
Trying to
is one of those things
those are almost impossible to do unless you have like an opera budget.
Right. Exactly.
And that confuses the audience too, especially if they don't know the history.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, wait a minute, where
are we? It's a confusing
we?
play.
I don't even remember if we're in Egypt, we're in Rome, we're in.
Yeah.
And I don't even know who
exactly.
where we are, who is that guy?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I think actually my desire to play Cleopatra has escalated more since learning more about Edward de Vere and the Oxfordian theory, because of obviously, like Cleopatra, it could be a resemblance of the queen herself. And I'd be interested as an actress to do that research, not just into the history of Cleopatra, but the life of Queen Elizabeth, and how much of Elizabeth is in Cleopatra, right? So I think that's partially now because of I'm that actress who loves to research and learn and know, and so that would be the fun desire for me too, is just that to play. Yes, obviously it's not a historically accurate play. It's a very, romanticized version of that affair between Mark Antony and Cleopatra, even to the point where, she commits suicide because of what happened to Antony, when truthfully, that's probably not why she commits suicide. But anyway, that being said, since it is very romanticized, it's not very historically accurate. However, it is still a historical figure, and for the connection to Elizabeth, as may have been, Edward's source material for the character that Cleopatra is, I think it would be very enticing as an actress who loves to research that type of thing to learn more about it.
Carted around on a litter. Admit it. Tell the truth. You just want to have 4 big, strong men carrying you around on a litter.
She's Cleopatra. Here's the thing. Who's the most, we've said it before, who's the most powerful woman in all of history? It's probably a toss-up between Elizabeth and Cleopatra.
No, I disagree. I think
it's definitely Elizabeth.
It's definitely Elizabeth. Cleopatra had to tie herself to 3 powerful men throughout her reign. A lot of people don't remember.
That's very true.
They remember that it was Caesar before it was Antony, but they don't remember that it was Herod before it was Caesar. So
okay, but she very successfely did that in the way that benefited her. So she was
talk about the trifecta. My goodness.
But that takes a very strong, intelligent, powerful within her own right woman, right? To use her manipulative, and I will definitely say manipulative, seductive powers. Is she, she's kind of like Edward de Vere in that sense. I'm not to say that he's manipulative, but he is not a very redeeming person. Like, the more we learn about him, the more we kind of realize he was not the greatest of people.
I would say,
but she's kind of the same way.
Exceptionally and beautifully flawed in every way.
And so is Cleopatra.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Now, Mark Antony is definitely a role worth playing.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why I never was really excited about it is because of that's not a great death scene.
No, it's not.
Cassius isn't a great death scene either.
No.
You know, it's not as noble. It's not as good, but I'll deal with that.
Right.
But Mark Antony's death scene it's another one of those where like, would you just die already?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's kind of
please.
funny because you almost wonder if like the bottom as Pyramus isn't actually making fun of Antony and
Cleopatra.
Yeah. Rather than Pyramus and Thisbe.
Right.
Because, you know, the guy stabs himself and then he lays there and talks about it for a whole like
Way
three more
too
pages
long.
before he finally dies.
Right.
And there's so much wailing that goes on in the play near the end too.
There is.
That it can become excessive.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I have a problem with. But one of the reasons I do want to play it is because I believe that it is a depiction of the love affair between Edward and Elizabeth.
Yeah. There you go.
I believe that it is him saying, I am your Mark Antony. You are my Cleopatra. You are my Egypt.
Right.
You are my England.
And we're a match for wits and intelligence and in our brains, but we can never be a match.
And
sexually or
physically.
whatever, but we can never be a match in life.
Or
You know, we
equals.
we can never be equals.
Right. And I will always be your servant in one way or another.
Yeah, exactly.
Is forever in subjugation.
Right.
Go figure.
There you go.
Right.
Oh, and we definitely need to play these swirls together.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we need to work on that before Othello. I don't know. But the time flies always with you, my darling, especially
is
when
fun.
we are talking about Shakespeare. If those of you who've been listening, if you've wondered how we stay merry, this is how. This is one of the things that brought us together. And yes, she's right. We do sometimes geek out until 2:00 in the morning on topics like this. And now that she's learned so much more about Oxfordianism and is catching up on her reading about Oxfordianism with all the books I keep handing her, the conversations just become even more enriching and more enlightening and more fun to share. And I hope you enjoyed us sharing this one with you, fellow Quillers.
It's been my pleasure.
Don't forget to go to your podcast provider and give us a rate and review, if you would, of the show. Help drive us up to the top of the page so we can convert more Quillers, one Oxfordian at a time. But one at a time is the way it works. So if you give us a hand with that, you can also help us out by purchasing some Quiller swag. That's right. If you go to the website, dragonwagonradio.com, you can find the Quiller swag. And if you order that, proceeds do go to the show and help us stay functioning and sending you more episodes every other week. If you have ideas for future episodes, please shoot us an email and let us know what you'd like to hear on the air as part of the series. And don't forget, if you need additional information about the Oxfordian theory, about the Shakespeare authorship question, please be sure to visit ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. That's ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, the sponsors of this program, and your source and resource for everything you need to know about the Shakespeare authorship question. I'm your host, Stephen Sable. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.